Welcome everyone to the Joint Committee for the Imagine Amherst Zoning and Planning Project. Unfortunately, Dal Giuliani, our chairperson, could not be here tonight. He asked myself, Daniel Witowski, to help facilitate this meeting. We only have our consultant with us for an hour, so we're going to try to dispose of some of the other items on the agenda afterwards, but we do wish to start with Kim to give us an overview of some of the comments we received at the Amherst Planning Board meeting last Wednesday, I believe. Thursday, I'm sorry. Kim, can you give us a quick highlight?
Sure. So as Dan mentioned, there was a public hearing at the Planning Board meeting on the 22nd, and we had some turnout from residents, and so we kind of went through what they had talked about and kind of summarized it into a few points. The first was the concept of density came up a lot, and how they were kind of unhappy with maybe some of the charrette images they saw and the intensity of those. And they mentioned how Amherst has a more suburban feel in most of its centers, and it doesn't have the same feel or form or density in most of its areas as the city of Buffalo. And also, like associated with the density, how to address the impacts if it were to increase, like traffic, stormwater, that type of thing. So that was one kind of general comment that came up a few times for a few residents. Height was another issue, as we all know. A lot of thought was put into the heights, but there was a comment about low-scale nodes, being only 2 stories where applicable, especially along Main Street, that 8 stories may be too tall and shouldn't be allowed near residential areas. And then you'll see in your document that we've given you, there's stories in feet, but originally the public hasn't seen anything regarding the feet that would be allowed for each designation. So that's been incorporated now. Another common theme was about green space and the desire to keep that and add a little bit more, possibly making that a requirement if there's a large lot with a lot of parking or something, making that sort of part of that. The fourth kind of thing was the word form-based came up a few times. They were concerned that they didn't want the code to be too flexible. They wanted it to be a little bit stricter. And then, clarification on what this means, like what form-based means, and how our code would be incorporating the form-based, types of design and context elements. And lastly was more so about process, and we heard this from some of the board members like Duncan and Dan about wanting to see, the zoning code, or at least sort of a first crack at some framework for that before they passed on the amendments to the plan to the town board. Making sure if Lee, of course, has enough guidance with the plan amendments that we've proposed, sort of going forward with that a little bit into the zoning and seeing some of those concepts before they moved the plan on. So, we kind of wanted to summarize these for you. We only have Lee for an hour, so we'll go to him next. But, we can always discuss those and address those later on in the meeting.
Thank you, Kim. Do you want to go right to Lee now, Dan? Lee, you're on. Can you hear us, Lee?
Hold on, Lee. I'm going to exit and go back in because it's being funny again.
Lee, can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, you're...
I'm fine. How do I sound?
You sound great, and you're on now.
Okay, appreciate it. So, I apologize that you've gotten this piece that I'm showing on the screen so late, but that's the timing we ended up with. I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. It's a fairly simple document. And the key to this is that it really provides the district framework for new districts. There are, as part of this project, going to be some modest amendments to other pieces of the code, including perhaps older districts. But the focus for tonight's conversation is on those new districts and the assessment associated with that. So I'm going to just kind of walk you through some of the materials that are in this document. I don't think we need to go through, sort of why we're here. That's an element that you've seen. And as you've heard me suggest a number of times, there are challenges implementing these kinds of objectives like promoting walkable higher density mixed-use centers using the existing GB zoning. So I think everybody's kind of on board with that, and what I'd like to focus a little bit on is the overall strategy for what we're hoping to achieve here, and then perhaps some of the details of the districts that would implement the mapping that you guys have already done for the plan amendment. So key to this is that we intend to replace some of the existing districts. NB, the neighborhood business, GB, general business, ST, shopping center, and the TND overlay, which is traditional neighborhood business, which was used, I believe, in Eggertsville and Snyder. All four of those tools would go away from the full code. They would be deleted and replaced with the kind of new zoning that we'll be discussing on the following pages of this document. Where any of those zones exist outside one of the currently designated centers in the plan amendment, they would either be rezoned using the new districts or they would be returned to a more appropriate zoning designation in recognition of the fact that they are not centers. So that's a set of decisions to be made as the zoning mapping is done. The CF, commercial services, MS, motor services, and T&D, traditional neighborhood district, which only applies to one property at One Way North on Millersport that we've looked at, would be retained, although it's possible they'll be modestly modified in the broader code project that's in the background and we haven't really talked about. So the districts that would be created would be the two types of form, traditional, suburban, and four types of place, low-scale node, medium-scale node, corridor, and center. We'll be talking about that a little bit more tonight. But basically, districts that implement those 8 permutations. Improving the existing transitions is also one of the key parts of creating these new districts, making sure that shallow lots are successfully buffered at the rear and the steep lots are really taken advantage of to make sure that land use in the rear portion of the lot and building height in the rear portion of the lot are managed. We also want to take a look again at use. We have this opportunity to say, do we want vehicle-related uses? If not, let's make sure those aren't there. Other kinds of things. Here's our chance to say some uses belong in small nodes and don't belong in large nodes, or maybe those for somebody in that.
Hold on, Lee, if you can hear us.
Lee, we're having audio problems. Lee, if you can hear us, please delay. We're having audio problems at our end.
I'll try to exit again. It's a connection.
Lee, can you hear us? Lee, we're still having trouble connecting to you. Can you hear us?
Hey, Dan.
All right, we're gonna go cell phone here.
I
don't know how that's
no
gonna-
phone is that phone.
Yeah.
Let me, I need to, kill off the other one on my phone. I'll be right back.
Okay. Yeah.
While we're waiting for Lee,
All right.
All right,
Can you hear me now?
Lee, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I wonder if you could hear us through there, you just can't talk through there. So right now you're talking through the cell phone, it's pretty clear on the speakers.
Okay.
So we have the images that we can walk through as you go through. If you want to change those, you can't control them, let us know.
Okay. I've got them on this end. Are you not on the computer at all?
We can see your images, so you can still walk.
Oh, okay. Great. So, should we restart at the development standards piece?
Yes.
We were at the bottom.
I think he talked about the uses. So.
Yeah, uses was where we lost you.
Okay. Do I need to redo the use piece?
I think that would be helpful, Lee.
Okay. So, uses is just an opportunity for us to look at these various scale places and decide whether uses are appropriate or not. You'll see an example of that on the table on the next page when we get to it, where I've broken down hotels in case we only want full-blown hotels in centers and never showing up in the other kinds of places, as an example. So we'll be revisiting use as part of the new district. In addition, then the development standards can help us with certain kinds of things, like we could set maximum footprint for a tenant. Like in a neighborhood center, that might be 2,000 or 5,000 square feet or something. And then the next larger center gets, 10 or 15,000 square feet and, whatever. So that we can sort of manage the scale of uses that show up as well as the scale of building. Helps break up those ground floors. The design and form standards might include things like stepping back height, or articulation on the face of the building to break it up, or screening obligations for parking garages. So design standards of some sort to deal with any issues that we imagine might come up over the bulk of larger buildings. We get a chance to update the parking standards to reflect this variety of kinds of places. Centers, for example, are more likely to have shared parking, whereas the smaller nodes, you don't want that overflow parking into neighborhoods, so you might be a little tougher on the parking standards in the smaller nodes if people are building new there. We get to update the sign standards because clearly a center is going to have a different intensity and kind of signage than might show up in one of the small nodes. Access requirements to make sure that we're breaking up large sites. If we had the Boulevard Mall site, we want that to be in, fundamentally 4 separate pieces with the ability to traverse that site instead of one large monolithic site, for example. Open space and amenity standards, improvements to the site itself to make the site both more appealing and more in keeping with adjacent development. The cross sections for new internal streets, because we think probably the town's street standards are not up to par for the kinds of streets that we would want in the center of these mixed-use areas. And then the streetscapes, both for these new streets and for any existing streets. All those components need to be prepared in the new zoning. So that's kind of the overall do zoning strategy, and then we prepared this table. So I'm going to show you the overall table, and then we'll zoom back in. But basically, you're seeing a potential designation, a zoning map designation for a district, then the district proposed name itself, some generalized uses that I've included to kind of characterize these places, what the front setback might be, what the height might be.
Hey, Lee?
So the key, yes.
Can you zoom in on that a little bit?
Yes,
The image is very small
absolutely.
here. That's good, thank you.
So if you remember, just name me one of the places that we probably call the low-scale node.
Maple and Air.
Great. So in that area, on Maple, we probably called it suburban as opposed to traditional. I don't quite remember. But the key would be the same kinds of uses. In traditional, we're thinking we need a two-story version. This is the one that would most likely be used in some portions of Eggertsville and Snyder. But then also the more typical, the three-story version, which is kind of the base height that neighborhoods get anyway, about that 35 to 40 feet tall. So the two-story version only 24 feet tall, a three-story version 40 feet tall. And then one of the other differences between these two would be the difference between traditional and suburban. Part of that is about their front setback and what you could potentially do in between that front setback. So if we just stick with low scale for a moment, I'm going to jump ahead to the next page, which talks, 2 pages on, which talks about the idea of frontage. So even in a low scale node, we might have a very urban setting, kind of this traditional model built to the street edge with a wide sidewalk. We might want green space in front. And we might even see, at least in the suburban version, you might see it sitting behind parking. Or we might ask that it actually take the form of something that looks residential. So here are the examples from Amherst of what some of those frontages might actually look like. So you could imagine, I'm just going to skip to a Google Street View image, right? This is admittedly on the edge of the village, and I'm not even certain. Is this in the town, Dan?
That's in the village.
Okay, so it's in the village. So we'll get to pick on the village here for a minute, at least on the architecture. But this, I think most people think of as traditional, both in its relationship to the street, the architecture, etc. Spin around to the other side of the street, and you see the Panera and the Walgreens site. This one happens to be suburban, in my mind. A deeper, greener setback out front, and then the project setback behind parking. So we can achieve both of these, right? Even at 2 stories, these happen to both be 2 stories, right? We can achieve both of those by applying the traditional low-scale node at 2 stories, one of which would be pulled up to the sidewalk, and one of which would be pushed back further, as an example. So that's all this table is trying to help you understand, is the variety of height and setback conditions that might exist. We fully expect we're going to modify some of this as we go through this, so this is definitely part of the discussion. Kind of the package of uses, how those setbacks might work, how those heights might work, is all part of the conversation that you guys should be holding when you dig in detail with my help at your next meeting. We're going to throw a map on the table. We're going to try and talk some of these through. So back on this bigger table, I just wanted to show you that in medium-scale nodes, we have 3 and 4-story flavors. In corridor, we have 3. In traditional, and in suburban, we have 3 and 5. And in the centers, in traditional, there's only one traditional center, as I recall. There's a 5-story traditional, 5-story suburban, and for at least the site where the Marriott is, an 8-story suburban center. Don't go thinking we're applying that everywhere. I don't think that's anybody's intent, but there are probably a couple of sites that could support that 8-story height. So this would be the package of new districts we would build. So we would build 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we would build 12 new districts in order to implement the map that you have created. A couple more things that I wanted to touch on. And those are the question and the last page of the materials about transitions. So when the public spoke, they were about the plan amendment. They were a bit concerned about a couple of things. Some of those could be resolved with frontages, more green space in some certain cases, more residential form in some cases. So some could be resolved with the frontage tool, but some need also then this transition tool, the rear or side lot line when you're changing districts to residential. Not only do we need sort of buffering and architectural elements, but we might actually want to think about restrictions on use or on the impact of use. The example I'm giving here, many of you know, this is the corner of Worley, and this is the taco place, for example. Luckily, nobody sits, immediately behind it, but I could easily imagine if they've got outdoor speakers, things going on, they might have late-night activity, so there might be concerns about noise associated with that. So you'd want to make sure that it's well buffered, and that perhaps you have rules that for those specific uses like drive-thrus, that make sure that they're handled correctly when they're near residential. So the speakers don't point towards the residential use, they point back towards the building, the speaker volumes aren't set too loud, the hours of operation are appropriate. All of those kinds of things that could be set as use standards are worth considering in resolving these transitions. But also, we need the simple transitional answers, like on a shallow lot. We're showing here the commercial site on the right-hand side and the house on the left. So the parking lot and building are sitting up against a landscape strip and a wall in the first case. On a deeper lot, we may not need the wall. Maybe it's just a very deep landscape buffer, and then maybe also some height constraints for the main building, such that even if we're in a 5 or 8 story district, if you happen to have this condition, you can't be 5 or 8 stories this close to the residential. So all of those would be transition rules. Now, one thing that staff may want to talk with you a little bit about is it could well be that these two ideas, transition and frontages, are important enough to the toolkit that's kind of being proposed in the plan amendment that we should consider, you should consider recommending to the planning board that they ask that this material get added, or something similar get added back into the plan, so that these kind of important ideas about both managing at a little finer degree the character, even if the district behind it is exactly the same, that front edge could be quite different, and that's important to people. And then also the transitions along the rear, or especially if they were side-on, adjacent to residential, that we get those transitions correct. And maybe those are components that need to be in the plan. You guys can discuss that and decide. We're just fine with putting them only in the zoning, but if it helps to discuss them generally in the plan before we put them in the zoning, that's just fine as well. So that's the quick overview of the material you've been given. I'm going to leave this on the table because my guess is the first thing we might want to talk about is some of the numbers and things, the flavors of zones in the table. So, Dan, back to you.
Lee, Daniel Wachowski, what I'd like to start off the discussions with in looking at this table is height. Unless anyone else on the committee here would like to ask questions of Lee. Would you like to ask questions first before we go into the table and discuss height?
So remember, we've sort of generally framed the heights in the plan. So low scale node says 2 to 3 stories. Actually, I've got that on the next page here. So 2 to 3 stories in low to scale node, 2 to 4 in medium scale, 2 to 5 in corridor, 3 to 8 in center. So that's where we're picking up on these. That's kind of what's driving us to set these varieties. If in the end we go to map these on the map and we find ourselves not using some of them, then we should change the plan amendment to reflect the set that we do select.
Lee, Daniel Wachowski again. I think my only immediate concern would be the suburban center 8 and permitting 8 stories or 105 feet. I recognize that the Marriott may be at that height now, but I'm concerned about continuing allowing such tall buildings in our community.
So here it is. It's all about, it's here now and more. This is actually 10 stories. And if you look at the setting for this site, it's completely buried between, Maple and Millersport and 290. Is this site, because of its access to the freeway, etc., appropriate for some of those taller buildings? And if not, if in the end, as part of the plan amendment, that decision should be made. If in the end, we decide that, 5 stories, the 65 feet that used to be in the GB district is the maximum height we should be allowing, then that's totally acceptable. That's a policy decision for you guys to make. I would just suggest that this site sings out to me as appropriate for that, not being adjacent to any single family.
I don't disagree with that particular site. I would have to suggest that we look at all the other sites that are also falling within that same classification. Hey.
Yeah, so the challenge for the other site, many of the other center sites are here where we had the deep parcels. Boulevard Mall, I don't think anyone has envisioned an initial zoning to 8 stories. I think we had all envisioned that most of these other sites that might be abutting residential would end up at the 5-story limit. So this is also suburban center, as is the northern portion of the Northtown site, as is a number of other settings, including just a couple over on Transit as well. So on Transit, let's see, Hopkins. On Transit, it's only the deeper site, and I don't remember whether this set is in, but it might be where the Lowe's is, for example. But again, these ones are fairly close to residential. I don't think anyone's going to suggest those be taller than 5 stories, and not 5 stories immediately against the back lot line.
Hey Lee, this is Brian. For the sake of this group, if you could just go back to our discussion that we had in planning a couple days ago on this particular topic. We were talking about Ridgely in the mix. We have a couple developers in the room, board members. So if we could kind of just elaborate a little bit on how we came up with the 8, including really construction values. So you kind of went into really some good topics, because initially I think all of us on the Amherst side were like, well, hang on a second. That's probably beneficial for this group, if you want to expand a little bit.
Well, so I guess I'm going to jump over to University Place here as sort of your most recent height that's been added that this is the perfect site kind of to have this conversation about. So using the building code that's in place today, developers can build, 1 story of concrete podium and up to 4 stories above that, so 5 stories total, stick built, and build the least expensive, building type that could be used for residential with ground floor retail. The minute you go to this building you see in the back for the hotel, I suspect this hotel has a different construction type because it's too tall to have been stick-built. So this would be what some people call institutional, concrete and steel construction, not stick-built. So this is not as cheap a building in the back, in spite of the fact that the facade is more plain. It's not as cheap a building as theoretically as this construction of this building. Once you switch from the 5-story height limit, most communities, most developers will tell you it takes 2 to 3 stories of additional height to make up for the increased cost of the lower building. That just comes from the change in construction type. So, is that kind of what you were trying to get at, Brian? Is that if I
think that's good.
One story more
right.
than 5, it's not ever going to happen. Everybody's going to build the 5 and not build the 6-story concrete steel.
This is a good example because you have the 6-story behind the 5-story here, so obviously
But this building is, because it's a hotel, it's a different kind of occupancy, and so it's probably concrete and steel already.
Can I continue on, or? Yes, hi, Lynn, this is Ramona. Good evening. Again, I want to express my concerns about the low-scale nodes and the medium-scale nodes in regards to height. I would like to continue to advocate for 1 to 2 stories for the low-scale nodes and 2 to 3 story for the medium-scale nodes. How would that change the height from 40 feet down? And also another question about the graph itself. Let's just take a look at the low scale nodes. And you've got 1 row of bullets there. But then on front setback and height, there's like a dotted line underneath. So do those bullets refer to the traditional low scale node 3 and 2? Mm-hmm.
Usage applied to all of the bullets, find usage for each one of them, and then the lines to the right differentiate between
Mm-hmm.
the front and back. That was your answer?
Mm-hmm. But I did not hear any response to my statement, so obviously you're still suggesting the 2 to 3 stories for traditional low scale, but I'm trying to really listen to the people who've come to this roulette and to the planning board meeting, and as Dan mentioned earlier, height seems to be still the major issue here, that, what impact would 1 to 2 on the traditional and 2 to 3 on the medium scale nodes?
Lee, can you hear Ramona and her question?
Yes, but is she asking that of me, or is she asking that of all of you?
She's asking that of you, Lee.
So, these are policy choices that you guys need to make. The challenge with a current day 2-story building is it is fairly unlikely, and that may be totally acceptable to the community, and I understand that, and so these are choices for you to make. The development community is more likely to bring you 1-story retail if they are only allowed 2, because they don't have to do a mixed-use building. And if you're doing mixed use, it is most likely that 3 is kind of the starting height for that in today's development market. But yes, there are many buildings here that are already 2 stories, and I understand where your desire comes from. Part of this is whether we're trying to incent any new activity to replace some of the older pieces, or whether we just want a couple of new buildings to fit exactly in with the form that we have. Those are two completely different ideas about what one might be trying to achieve here.
So what you're saying then is...
But fundamentally, you guys set the policy, and we're glad to code for its outcome.
So, in essence, the medium-scale node would be able to allow for mixed use if it was 2 to 3 stories, based on what you just said, but the low-scale node would not, if it was just 1 to 2 stories.
Somebody tell me, what was one of the medium-scale nodes? Is Kensington and is like Kensington and Bailey, is that medium scale?
Kensington and Maine and Village West, I think, are medium scale codes.
Yeah, so this setting, this one is medium scale. You've already got some fairly, large footprint, admittedly single-story buildings, but, larger buildings than maybe people are comfortable with in the low-scale node. You've got the Walgreens and the CVS. Might we have liked this node a little better had it been built as mixed use instead of just single use? Perhaps. Also, that Jubilee store is clearly an old grocery or something that was there, fairly large footprint store. So yes, this is a different kind of place than Snyder and Eggertsville.
Lee, you have to continue down the street. You're at Harlem and Kensington, not Maine and Kensington. So you have to continue in the easterly direction.
Kensington to Maine.
Go along Kensington in the easterly direction to Main Street. You're at Kensington and Harlem right now. So go northeast.
Did I miss it?
Yeah, just go northeast from here.
So this site where the automotive stuff is Kensington and Maine, right?
Yeah, just take the west side of that interchange, and that's Main again.
So let's just jump down on the ground here and just have a look at what's back here. I recall it's the dentist, right, that's back in there. Mostly one story, though. This guy a little bigger. Can't really tell how many stories that one quite is, but looks like really just 2. But yeah, one of the keys to whether it's tolerable to have additional height is what are the relationship between the parcels and the adjacent development. Are they deep enough to accommodate height without immediately impacting residential? So, that's the tough question here. You've got a number of parcels here that are fairly large. If the buildings had been pulled up closer to the street, they would not be impacting the residential back behind, and these ones certainly that are abutting the freeway interchange that lie between Kensington and the 290 could also clearly be taller. But we can, that's the beauty of the potential for this zoning. In this same area, let's say this allowed 2/3, you could put 2 on a portion and 3 on a portion in the same node. The node does not need to be all one thing. We can, parcel by parcel, apply the height where it's appropriate. And, this is a great example. Here's the funeral home site, with the appropriate buffer in the back and the funeral home here closer to the street. Is this an acceptable pattern, even though it is immediately adjacent to single family? Perhaps it is.
Lee, after last week's planning board meeting, I had a greater sense of awareness of scale as I drove around the community, and looking at some of the existing buildings along Main Street, I think, in my own mind, I'm more willing to accept three-story if the uppermost story is part of the roof. So I think form at the uppermost story has a lot to do with one's acceptance of height, or at least in my opinion. A rectangular box at 3 stories, I think, is in some respects out of context. But if you have a mansard roof, or if you have a roof feature on that 3rd floor, I find it more appealing if I'm to, accept a 3rd story somewhere in a residential setting or something where we have lower scale buildings. I just wanted to throw that out there.
It's a very good point. So when we prepared this image of Snyder, that was definitely one of the things that people reacted to. There's a set of buildings here that could have actually been 3 stories with a 3rd story in the roof. There's one of them here labeled C as well. Those were designated to have that residential frontage, which would change their character to make sure they weren't these kinds of flat-roofed commercial buildings that show up in the other portions of the drawing.
Lee, this is Dan. Can you hold this image here, but can you go down to Street View to that intersection, Main and Harlem?
Yes.
There's two things I think it might be helpful to look at for context. One is the Snyder Square building, which is on the northwest corner of Main and Harlem, and the other is what I think is a home office kind of mixed-use building, which is right behind the gas station to the south of Main Street. So from the ground view, let's see, where are we here? Yeah, so I can't tell how tall that is, but that is effectively probably a 3-story high building, although it looks like it's 2. And this is the kind of the roof feature I think Dan was talking about. You get the height, but it's not. It's tempered a little bit by the roof. So
it absolutely is, and I guess one of the key things that I personally wish for this building was that it had been pulled up here to the street.
Right. So now if you can
maybe not immediately abutting the street, but somewhere closer. The parking areas here are challenging in terms of their walkability. The other one was where? On down Harlem here?
I want you to go south of Main Street, so across the street.
Behind full 3 stories right there.
That's the one I'm talking about. That's right behind the gas station. That's right behind the gas station at Main and Harlem. That is 3 full stories with that roof feature.
And that's actually only a mansard roof, so this is really a flat roof building in disguise, right? This is only a mansard. It's not a true pitched roof. So that's a full story up there.
I don't know exactly what's in. Alan, do you know what's in there? You said I hear.
Looks like a law office.
Is there residences in there too, or is it just?
Isn't there advertising firm in there or something?
I don't know. Okay. So I don't know if that kind of exemplifies what Dan's talking about a little bit. I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lee, this is Gary Palumbo. Well, Dan was talking about making 3 stories possibly more acceptable. There's also been questions and requests that we continue to lower the number of stories to be allowed in future districts. I'm wondering if my concern is not having enough height with a 1-story building. We've got plenty of 1-story buildings, and no one's pointing out any that are very attractive. So if there is a 1 to 2-story category, how would you address minimum, if not minimum number of stories, but minimum height?
Well, you could certainly set minimum height in feet so that 1-story buildings were, in their appearance, a little bit. This is a very low 1-story building, right? That is as small a building as you can fit within the height. were we to walk indoors, you know, we would probably feel it was a little bit cramped, because even some of these other pieces that are nearby are taller. Is this, what's down here? This is just Denny's, I guess. What I was looking for was a tall one-story building, like the CVS or Walgreens that we were looking at. Those are the more classic, current pattern that you would see for a fully retail building. Now, a bank is kind of a half-breed retail building, but let's look again at this CVS, right?
Lee, in your
building, but very prominent.
Lee, in your original example, the street view, it was Main and Union, I believe. You thought it was a two-story building. It was actually a one-story building that resembled two stories. It was the Walgreens across from, it was in the Village, across from Spot Coffee. It was Main and Union, I believe.
Oh,
That's my
absolutely,
point,
absolutely. Yeah, that one, yeah, that is a poster child for sort of classic, currently desired by tenants, suburban architecture. So absolutely, this site, yeah. So this is a very good example. So thank you for reminding me. Right, all second floor, very prominent building. You know, has more of a two-story feel. Actually, the Panera Bread done a little more effectively. I don't know if there's an actual upstairs in there, but at least it looks a little more real, even though the windows are all shinied out. Whereas the Walgreens doesn't even try to look real. On the other hand, here's a very nice second story. So yes, you could set a minimum so that we did not get this building back again, whatever this is. I don't mean to pick on anybody, but I'm just kind of looking at the various street views. You know, this is an old building and the brickwork is nice, and so we probably like it from that perspective, but especially
we have
from this side.
We have a few questions, Lee.
Exactly, you know, a great center building that encourages walkability.
Lee, I have just a quick comment. Interesting that Walgreens and Panera was
Yes.
the example you just used for a good-looking one-story building. That type of building is not inexpensive to build, and so it doesn't surprise me that a national chain, Walgreens and Panera, is in occupying that type of structure. So I would just, you know, caution about the balance between a height and the ability, the feasibility of building structures like this. You may find that if you designate this kind of height, that you won't get too many local mom and pop owned uses in here because they won't be able to afford the rent.
You're saying it should be either 1 or 3?
I think actually, you know, for the most part, that's true in many ways of a new building period. I mean, the cost of the construction of a new building has a tendency to drive who the tenant can be. And only when you have upper story uses that might help pay down the price can you get those smaller, more modest tenants. Is there any, are there any local tenants in University Place? Does anyone recall the one across from the university? I don't personally remember what's in there, but I mean that's some of the last, you know, new similar space that you guys have built.
Repeat that question?
Are there any local tenants here in University Place?
The Chinese on the first floor, they're third bar, floor.
But that's not high-value real estate. The underlying real estate there is not expensive. So if we go back to Main Street, for example, we built a building in the Village at 5870 Main Street in Wynewalt. So
I guess all I'm suggesting is there's a relationship between new and expensive, that the smaller local tenants are likely to be in older spaces or very small spaces in new buildings, not typically coming to new spaces in new buildings, because unless that residential above is paying over what they should be paying in support of the retail, the cost of the building is such that you'll get the national chain.
Yes, I'd agree. This is David Chiazza-Lee. I'd agree with that. I was just kind of piggybacking on Carl's comment, but more so than just the cost of that false second story, especially when you're on Main Street. You have the underlying real estate cost of Main Street, which is probably the premium strip in the town of Amherst. So even if you didn't have that false second story, if you're building new construction, you're only really attracting a very select group of tenants that can afford the cost of new construction. Otherwise, the existing mom and pops stay in the older buildings that are there that are rented more cheaply. So if you layer in the extra cost of the false work to kind of create the illusion of a second floor, you just make it that much more expensive. We've always tried to avoid that. We actually don't like the false second story look. We think if you're going to spend that much money, you might as well make an actual real second story and make it functional as we did in Kenmore. False work just doesn't appeal to us. It's just gingerbread in Cowboy Town, and just don't like it that much. But if folks prefer that, they prefer that. But it's not what we would ever recommend for any community that's trying to hit a high standard. And I say that as a resident of 30 years, plus a developer. I'm not just a developer, I'm also a resident.
I would agree, this is Carl again, I would agree with David's comments, and Lee, I would also emphasize the comment you made in that as you increase the number of stories on a site, you also increase the feasibility of the financial feasibility of a project. And to that degree, you also enable the existence of local merchants to occupy these structures, especially new structures. So
yeah, certainly, if you look at the differential between a two-story building and a four-story building, and the ability for the four-story building to pay for land, etc., and write down the cost of the ground floor, there's a very big difference between those two buildings. What we were hoping, my time is running short, and we want to continue this conversation, but we want to continue it the same way we have been here, sort of in the guise of a very specific site and actually applying these new zoning tools to the individual sites that have been designated as different center types. That will allow us to make sure that we understand what the new zoning might do, but also it allows us to sort of road test the center types before we adopt the plan amendment. So, Pat's going to talk to you a little bit. We're going to try to run an actual mapping exercise during my visit in the middle of July, so a couple of weeks from now. I will be out there to help staff run an exercise, kind of a breakout exercise, where we try to apply this to a variety of places on the map and see whether the tools are working.
Can I just ask one other question about the district framework, the district chart that's here? When you're looking at the height section where it might say 3 stories or 40 feet or 5 stories or 65 feet, is it one or the other? Is it the lesser of the two? How do you interpret that?
Well, so of course, I'm going to tell you to start out with the taller one, and if that one doesn't work out, then come back to the shorter one. Having said that, I think you're going to look at these individual sites and you're going to say, hey, I need this one, I need that one. Remember that we can modify the height on the front with a step back if we chose to do so, and we can modify the height on the back with the transition. if we chose to do so. So really, this is the height kind of in the core of the site. So here's an image that happens to show a front step back here, trying to be sensitive to this lower scale building next door, right? So there's bringing it down to 2 stories, even though it's a 3-story district. And then the same would be true, imagine that was along a back lot line. I don't know that we have anything in this series that was along the back lot line, but here we brought down, in Gettsville, we brought down those stories by putting in a more residential looking structure on the back. These might be filled with offices, for example, or they could even be a little mixed use, could be a little restaurant or something, but at least it begins to look like a house and mimic what's going on the other side of the street. So we have tools to modify that, so the height is really what's happening, kind of grossly on the site, and then can we live with that? Do we need to manipulate it a little with some of these other tools, or do we literally need to take that story off and say it's only 2? And those are the conversations we need to have, and if we don't have enough flavors in that table, we'll simply ask.
I'm not sure my question was clear, Lee. Let me restate it. So if you look at suburban medium scale node 4, under height it says 4 stories, 55 feet max. What if I could do 5 stories and 55 feet? Which is the prevailing limit?
I don't think there is one. I think site by site, we're going to apply the zoning, or propose to apply the zoning, of either 3 stories or 5 stories. And to me, the key in suburban corridor is 5 stories is for deeper sites, 3 stories is for shallower sites.
Lee Daniel Wachowski, I'm going to ask the exact same question that David did. I'm in suburban medium scale node 4. I'm assuming I'm limited to 4 stories max, regardless of whether or not I could build a 5-story building that's only 55 feet tall. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So
the 55 feet maximum is a gracious story height for a building with a retail ground floor and office or residential upper story.
Okay. So number of stories will
be one that would accomplish a nice 4-story building.
Okay. So now,
if you choose to build a 4-story all residential and it is focused on a lower end market and you want to have 10-foot stories, your building's going to be 40 feet tall.
okay, so 4 stories will prevail. So as far as the question goes, the maximum number of stories will be the governing factor.
It's both, yes. So you must meet the maximum of 4 stories and the you cannot exceed 55 feet while you are achieving your 4 stories.
Okay. So maybe we simply qualify the table by putting max after stories as well.
We can do that.
Thank you, Lee.
It's really and 2 stories and 24 feet max. It's 2 stories max and 24 feet max. Both have to be true.
Lee, I want to keep you on schedule, and just for clarification, you're suggesting that what you're going to do with planning staff and this committee in the future is that for each and every mixed-use commercial area that we designated, we're going to try to assign a zoning classification for each and every one of those parcels, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And if we need them, an application of a frontage and maybe even some discussion of how transitions might work successfully. But yes, we want to look at some very real places and try to make the zoning map.
And then, to give Ramona comfort, I'm assuming after this exercise, we'll be able to look at each and every geography and place this in context, and we may ultimately say that we don't want 5 stories, and we don't want 8 stories, and we may remove those from the schedule altogether if necessary.
Absolutely, yes, and we should change the plan amendment at that point. That's why we're trying to do this in July before the plan amendment goes back to the planning board in August.
Great, thank you, Lee. Does anyone else have any final questions for Lee before he has to leave us?
I have one.
Gary?
don't know how this plan came up.
Lee, I know we're not going to have time to dig into this question deeply, but it's going to come up. The front setbacks, maximums. I understand your purpose in setting a 30-foot maximum, but that has a lot of, several of the suburban types, suburban low, suburban medium, corridor, suburban corridor, without any front parking at all, with only 30 feet. Is that the intent, or am I doing the math wrong?
So if you wanted front yard parking, you would apply this frontage, and the 10 to 30 would be behind the parking, would begin behind the frontage, if you will.
Thank you. That answer.
Lee, I think that completes all the questions we have for you, and Rick, do you...
That's great. I'm going to go repeat this exercise with my zoning advisory committee here in Los Angeles.
Thank you very much for your time, Lee.
We'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Look forward to it.
Okay, we're going to move back to item 2 on the agenda. Okay. I apologize. We're going to keep discussing the issue of height if that's appropriate.
I have a few thoughts. I like what's being said here. I have a concern in places. I guess a good example for people to look at would be it's Sheridan and I believe Bailey, where they've just done 2 outbuildings. The Starbucks coffee building, which is a 1-story tall building, and then right on the corner you've got the Sleep Number and the Dickey Barbecue. That's tall. So now they've taken, which was a low 1-story building, and they've added this stuff sticking up, in my verbiage, sticking up to try and make it look 2-story and be visible from the street. And I hope that if we look at a 1-story building, that we don't look at like the back parts of these buildings. That the context needs to be on each site, and I think the idea of our looking at each site becomes good, because the rear abutting places is as important as the street view, in my opinion. And also, I think it has a little bit to do, if you look at the University District and those buildings, you can see them from quite a distance. They're up on a high point in the town, and you can see them from all around. And yet, if you look at the Marriott, it's sort of down in a hole. So even though it's taller, it doesn't look as big as the other buildings. So again, I like the idea of our looking at individual sites to set some of these parameters, because I think each site is unique and we need to study them from that perspective.
Brian, I had a question for you, and this is a perspective on anything else. Will we see these like excessive parapets?
Where we see that, what I'll refer to as excessive parapets, are they being driven by the fact that the town requires that the mechanical equipment be screened? Is that is that part of that?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Duncan's example, we were told that the plaza was going to be refaced also. So these out parcels kind of beat the plaza being refaced. I think when that happens in the near future, that's underway, then, you know, that should be a little closer to it flowing through there.
Not my opinion, but that's
well, we
personal.
have a utility discussion and things on that site also, so.
The other part of that discussion, I think we need to have this as we move forward with this project, is that it would appear that in some cases, those structures with these parapets, these what I'll call excessive parapets again, may be driven by the sense that they're trying to create a more imposing building or a building that appears to be more dense than it really is. And I'm concerned as to whether or not that indeed is happening. And possibly we should be looking at some limitations to the height of those parapets. I particularly have a preference for having a real second story as opposed to those parapets as well. That being said, when you do that, then you run into the problem again with screening the mechanical equipment on top of that second story, so the building will appear to be even taller. But I think that's an issue we need to discuss as we move forward.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is that I believe one of the objectives of the comprehensive plan and the amendments that we're talking about here is to try and encourage mixed-use development in places where we think it's appropriate to have that kind of density, those kinds of activity centers, the kinds of things that are attractive to people that enjoy that kind of environment. And so to go back to Rick's point a moment ago, we should be encouraging authentic two-story buildings, three-story buildings that would accommodate mixed-use forms of development, to try and create those places that we think are desired by folks these days. So as we're going through the map and trying to determine where these different levels of building might be located, I think we need to keep that in mind too. We're going to look for the places we think that are appropriate, and we would like to encourage redevelopment in a density that creates those kind of places. And I'm going to stop and ask Dave and Carl to comment on that based on their experiences. I don't know if that's accurate, or you can expound on that a little.
Well, I'm interested in Carl's comments, but I can tell you it wasn't that long ago, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, it'd be very difficult to convince a branded retailer to go into a building that had other uses above it. It does create some complications when you're trying to design a building like that, because you got to get vertical circulation in there, and it begins to impede upon that branded retailer's footprint, and they're always concerned about security and who else has access above or below them. So for years it was really difficult. So unless you're in Alexandria, Virginia, where real estate's at an uber premium and you can make retailers do what you want, in a market where you're trying to attract retailers, they could go anywhere they want to go, and they go to the next town and not have to deal with highly regulated areas in another town, and just cross the border, go somewhere else. It was really hard to convince a branded retailer to do that, and I think that's part of the issues I recall that Benderson had with Walgreens on Main Street in Union, is Walgreens didn't want to go into a two-story building, so I ended up compromised by building this false second story. Now, I think nationally that trend is changing. I think there's more of an acceptance on a lot of the branded retailers to kind of fall into these mixed-use communities, seeing that people like them, they're more attractive. But it's not universal, and depending on what community you're in, they may say, well, we would do it there, but we won't do it there, because we can go anywhere in that market. We just go to the next street over. So it's just, for us, it's just, we don't only control so much of it, and the more prescriptive you become on these things, you may find out that, you know, as much as we may like them, we can't cause tenants to go there. We had a hell of a time in Kenmore filling up our second floor. So we did a second floor of medical office space, and we did a first floor of retail. And we built a very nice building. Well, we thought there'd be just enough depth in Kenmore of medical uses that could actually afford to pay the rent for second floor new construction. Well, there weren't. And even the retail on the first floor, it took us 6 years to lease the building up, I'm embarrassed to say. And yet, we think we did a great building. Everybody loves it. But at the end of the day, was it successful financially? Well, maybe if you hold it for 25 years, it will be. But for the first 10, it hasn't been. So that's part of the challenges that we face. It's just hard to do that. And I said the tougher it gets made on us to do these things, even though we may agree with them in principle, we still have to find tenants to go in them and pay the rent.
David, before you move on, could you, maybe in simpler terms, describe the Kenmore situation and why it was so difficult for you to lease the building up? What was it about the format, the two-story with office above, that made it more difficult for you to lease that property?
Well, when you go 2 stories, you add cost to the product. Not just, the second floor is expensive because I've got to add an elevator, I've got to add a core, I've got to add stairs. So I'm taking square footage away that if I did a single-story building, I don't have to do any of those things. It's all rentable. So if you go 2 blocks south, you cross Kenmore Avenue, you see Benderson's strip plazas that are on the next two blocks going south side of the street. They are almost as tall as our two-story building, because they did a tall four-headed, I call them Frankenstein buildings, with tall foreheads. But they're single-story buildings, and all of those buildings are fully rentable, parking's in front, it's a traditional retail model, tastefully done, but one story. And we decided in the village of Kenmore, which is a historic village, we weren't going to do that. We put the parking on the side and the back, we went 2 stories, but we increased cost by doing that in a market, which is not Williamsville, that is generally speaking a lower rent market than here. There's a huge stock of existing inventory in Kenmore of buildings that were 50, 60 years old that are renting for $7 or $8, $9 a square foot. We're going in there at 18, 19, or 20, thinking... This is the corridor, correct? Yeah, so we're just like 1 block north of Kenmore Avenue.
No, that's not. It's up further, it's up by the street.
Just next to Jack Hunt Coins.
There's the back end of the property right there. Yeah, that building up on that right corner.
Next block, next block.
This is a beautiful building.
That's a great building. And I remember when we were building it, and, you know, Paul and I would have some healthy tension, but I said, remember, Paul, this is Kenmore, not Williamsville, because in addition, you've got a 2-tiered tax structure in Tonawanda, so property taxes there are extraordinarily more expensive than Amherst. So the occupancy costs of the tenant were very high. So in addition to doing a very nice all-brick building, because it doesn't have a back side really, because the entrance to the office space, the core, is in the back of the building. So you've got the cost of 4 sides of basically of a side building, and 2 stories, stairwells, elevators, core area, very expensive building. And we thought, okay, we've got 20,000 feet. We can find 20,000 feet of people in Kenmore to pay the rent there. Well, we could. It took us 6.5 years to do so. So it's a challenge, and it's, you know, it's, at the end of the day, we're trying to make a living. We don't have to get, you know, greedily wealthy on these things, but they're hard to do, these projects. And we made it tough for ourselves. We volunteered to do that. And we've asked ourselves, gee, I guess we wouldn't do it any differently, but it would have been nice just to do what Benderson did. Just go 2 blocks, keep going south as you were going, Kim.
That building was beautiful.
Yeah, so if you see, there's Benderson's plazas. They're perfectly tastefully done. They're nice. They're full. And they didn't have any of the challenges we had in leasing it up.
How would you ask the fact that they didn't have parking in front of the building and this one did have parking in front of the building? Or let me phrase that a different way. Was that a significant factor in the problems you have with leasing the parking?
We were cautioned, Rex Berger, who was, he's back at Benderson, but at the time, Rex Berger was one of the premier leasing people at Benderson Development. He had left there for a period of time. And he was consulting with us at the time we were doing Delaware Avenue. He cautioned us about not doing parking in front of the building. He said the retailers won't like it. You won't get branded retail there. And we didn't. We don't have any branded retail there. We reserved some parking on one end of the building, but all the parking is on the other side. And at least in Kenmore anyways, I can't say the same would be true in Williamsville, we couldn't attract any branded retailers there because there's no parking in front. He just said that branded retailers they want other people to see cars in front of the store. We think that's ugly, but retailers think that's beautiful.
I have a question of David and Carl. When you drive around town, you see the various new development plazas or whatever, and some of them are vacant. I'm thinking right offhand, I was just driving by on Maple near Transit, I guess in front of Amberley. There's a new structure there. I can't remember exactly what the sign says, but seeking tenants or something.
Benderson's new, 1-story.
1-story. It's right in front of Amberley. Is it possible, so there isn't so many vacant areas in the plazas, that to get tenants before you actually build a building?
We always love to do that if you can, but...
so that it's not vacant for 6 years, or...
Yeah, well, first of all, I call it a transgender building because they're designing them now so they can go either office or retail, they can go either way. And that's a nice building because you can see it as almost being an office building, almost see it as being retail, which wasn't always the case. I think they did a decent job of what they're trying to do there. We always love to get tenants beforehand, but tenants, especially in today's day and age, tend to not have that long a view. They don't want to wait that long. We find that, except for, you know, the Delaware Norths of the world that know they got to plan a large project, most tenants want to kind of be in and up and operating in 90 or 120 days. And if they have to wait for a new building to get developed and approved, so it's a 1-year timeline, they won't wait that long.
So no, I think the structure is there. I don't know if anybody's in it, the one I was just referring to.
I don't believe it's finished construction.
Construction. Okay, but,
They asked to rezone that for one and a half story better. The restrictions from the town board were that it was less residential.
Yeah, typically, you, unless you're Benderson, where you can finance your own buildings, you need at least an anchor tenant in order to get financing to start the building. So, you know, anywhere from 30 to 50% pre-leased. But again, I think Benderson's got enough financial horsepower that he can just absorb that cost internally. Right. But David's right. Many retailers and even office tenants, they want to be able to kick the tires. They want to actually see it, especially in municipalities where the regulatory process, the construction process is anywhere from, 18 months to 24 months. They just can't afford to wait. They'll go elsewhere where, there's less risk and they're more sure that they can get in when they need to. But, getting back to Dan's initial question, we're talking this committee, this project is really focused on mixed use. And, there's, to do mixed use right is, like Lee said, is more expensive, and David said as well. Oftentimes you gotta use independent mechanical systems, and there's just a myriad of issues at play when you're talking different uses and multiple stories. And that's why, and I understand the issue with height and the sensitivity of going too high, but when you limit height, at the end of the day, you're limiting the ability for a developer to develop a project, a nice-looking building that the town can be proud of, and be able to do it profitably. And if the feasibility is, to a point where it just doesn't make sense, a developer is going to go elsewhere. And the other point, again, that was made earlier is that in this day and age, development costs, construction costs are increasing, but leasing costs are not appreciating at the same level, unfortunately. So developers are getting squeezed, and it's very difficult to afford quality design, quality construction nowadays, but height helps that. And, height typically means higher density. And unfortunately, density seems to be a dirty word in suburbs among many residents. And if you've ever been outside of this area in another vibrant town or city in the country and seen the kind of vitality and energy that dense mixed-use walkable communities brings to the health of a community, I would encourage you to experience that firsthand. Benderson's plazas, they're good-looking one-story structures, but they're not pedestrian-friendly. No one's drawn there for the vibrancy of a strip plaza. You don't get that, and you need a certain amount of density to create the energy that good mixed use brings. So again, you just got to balance the sensitivity to height to the energy and the vibrancy that mixed use in certain areas that you can, have the potential for. So in my mind, why not height? Why not more height?
Again, I think it's early for the discussion, but maybe next time we meet, we're going to talk about the individual sites. Are we going to propose anything in the code that's going to mandate mixed uses, or just allow mixed uses? I don't know how we could mandate it, but we may end up with, just look at the general categories of land uses on the table we're talking about tonight. It would be nice to have something with multifamily and retail in the same space, the same property, if not the same building. But we also may end up with one low-scale suburban node that's just office, and another medium-scale suburban node that's just multifamily, unless we mandate it. And I don't know if we're talking about mandating or how we possibly could, especially on a small site.
It's a good point, Gary. Just there, you address that.
Thank you. I think previously it's been the town's position, or policy position, with its zoning code, is that the zoning code would enable types of development and wouldn't actually require that types of development. Now, some of you say, well, you require things like setbacks and what have you, and that's correct. But when it came to use, it was basically to enable those uses and not to mandate them. I think we're going to be in a position here where we're going to need to we may want to take a strong policy stand and say, if you're going to do mixed use, you will do mixed use in certain areas. And that presents its own problems. And I think that Carl mentioned those. If you're going to do that, you have to be able to mandate something which is economically feasible.
Just trying to apply everything I've heard tonight, because there are certain areas of the town that want the lower height. So when we try to apply these scales here to an actual site, we could really sort of say, okay, this area's been very vocal, they want the lower height. We could give them the lower height, but in the traditional low-scale nodes, in other areas of town, you could have the higher height.
I think at some point, we're going to have to make a policy decision, which essentially says, there's certain areas of the town where there's no support for solar structures, which are necessary in order for reinvestment in those areas. I think those areas would buy into it, and it would be the town's policy, would buy into a status quo and basically being able to get what they can with that form of development. My belief is that at some point in the future, when they see what happens in some of the real mixed-use development that I think we can enable, I think that attitude may change somewhat. But I think in the short term, it may well be that some of these districts will essentially be holding districts for the existing pattern. I don't know if we do this, but I don't think that's the proper approach. But if indeed that's the policy that we have to put in place in order for a consensus that this whole project needs to move forward, and so be it.
Remember, I think that's the hard work we have yet to do, and it's going to be hard when we get to them site by site. We think the work's been hard so far, it's going to get harder when we get to them site by site. And I wasn't able to attend the planning board meeting, but I got a complete rundown, basically as it was happening. I applaud the people that are here from the public. Ones that have been showing up, the very few, and I understand there are only 20 people that showed up at the public hearing, and that's disappointing. I applaud those people for taking the time to be there, whether or not I agree with their views, because they're taking the time to be there. At the same time, I consider this a community of 150,000 people if I count students, and there's this unspoken, huge majority of people that just aren't engaged, and it's unfortunate. And I wish they would get more engaged. I wish they would have more of what we have to say. So I think we can maybe break through some of the barriers of this anti-developer, pro-developer, this kind of stuff. Like I said, I'm a resident as well as a developer. Been here for 32 years, longer than I've been a developer. So it's hard sometimes to not have the ability to engage with the folks who may not disagree or may not agree with me, but have a chance to maybe learn from both sides. But my concern is, and I'm actually speaking to the board when I say this, is at the end of the day, the board has to have a bigger vision than that. You're elected represent 120,000 people, not the 30 or 50 people that show up, or even the people in this room. It's all of the people in this town. And my concern is when we go through plans like this, like we did 15 years ago, the polarization becomes the plan without the forward thinking about what the town has to deal with looking forward, like paying for a new sewage treatment plant. Now, the other things that come, and as we begin to chip away at as-of-right property uses and perhaps decreased values, the folks that are opposing height today need to understand that they may have an implication on their property taxes 5 or 10 years from now, because things got to get paid for. And I think the folks that are here and go on the meetings know that, and if they still have that position, say, I don't care, that's what I want. I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure that the board is making those, when I vote for somebody in the office, I want them to have a long-term view of the health of the town, not just what's on the plate in front of them today, because they have the unique position of having to deal with all of these issues every day and understand what's coming, whereas most residents don't have the time of day to spend that time to understand all those issues. So that's got to come from our elected officials. And if they were all here, I'd say to all the board members, I hope you're engaging your constituents with all of these issues, not just the ones they're talking to you about, because they need to understand all of this stuff, because what the seeds we sow today will have implications 5, 7, 10, 12 years from now, that you may not be in office at that time, but those residents will be complaining about high taxes, and someone will say, well, that was that group 12 years ago that voted that thing, and now we heard our property values doing a lot of tax appeals. I'm making a simple, oversimplified case, but the point is that this is a pretty important document. It's going to set in the zoning amendments that we do, we're going to set the seeds of where we go forward from here, and if it doesn't work out, there's implications to that could have far-reaching effects to everybody in the town, not just the 20 or 30 or 50 people that are invested in this process. And I'm including us in that, as well as the folks that are showing up.
At the meeting, I thought there was some really, some good input from some of the residents. One thing that drew my attention, there was a woman who was concerned about, we're not even defining uses. So, looking back, we actually do define what uses we want in this vision statement. So, I'm glad that we're able to look at this on a slower scale, or a slower pace rather, and look at this parcel by parcel and look at the context, so we can look at what the visual impact may be. I think form is really important here, and I think that's a hard concept to grasp. The example Dan brought us to, the three-story office, it looked benign, but it looked benign because of its width and frontage. If we look at the wall face and we don't articulate breaks, it has an entirely different feel in its shape and form. So I think form is a really governing factor here, as well as height.
Dan, I think a couple other things. One, we keep talking about density, and I think there are really two densities that we're talking about. It's the density of the buildings, the physical buildings, but it's also the density of the population that gets created by those buildings. And a little of that seems scary in a way to a lot of people, because you think all of a sudden we're going to have big buildings and we're going to have a whole bunch of people, which is going to mean all sorts of automobiles coming and going, and it's just all our roads are going to get packed, and we've got problems. Yet, if it's a good mixed-use facility, the people aren't going to be using their cars to go places. They're going to be living, working, playing, all in a part of the community where they are. If there's good public transportation, they're going to be able to use that. And the other comment, something that was given to me the other night, that goes with the tax base that you were talking about, David, that the commercial spaces, my understanding is, in the town of Amherst currently are paying 38% of the property tax in the whole town. And yet if you look at the area that they take, it's a very small amount. So if that starts drifting away and lowering, the residential area is going to have to pick this up, or the non-commercial areas, And that's gonna hit everybody, and it could get pretty heavy if we don't properly get this package put together. And, I think I'm encouraged to see us getting into the real detail at this point.
Something, one of the concerns that I have in that regard is that, if indeed the commercial office, tax base erodes, and then the cost of government will begin to fall more and more on residential uses, the reaction is going to be that we're going to begin to cut away at the quality of life investments that we make in the town. Those quality of life investments that we make are ace in the hole. That's why we are so successful here in the community, is because the service, the quality of the services and the range of services that we provide. We begin to lose that, and we're going to begin to lose our competitive advantage.
Just thinking of some more comments of what other people have said, that I do think that, in regards to what David was just saying, that the board does realize this is long-range planning and the importance of it. And also, at the planning board meeting, I got the sense that several of the speakers didn't really understand the full charge of this, you know, going into residential or more green space throughout the town. And I wanted people to know that, not just that I sponsored a resolution last year, but in updating the master plan for our parks, that's ongoing right now. There's a consultant for that. Maybe we should get more information out on that, what is happening with that, with the green space, you know, in the town. Let's see, and I had one more thing I wanted to say. I'll probably think of it in a minute or two.
Any other comments? I think this is a good discussion, and I think there's a lot of good points that came out this evening, and there are things to think about. And our intent tonight was to give you a piece to go back and maybe have a little more detail on what some of the concepts and the policies are that are in the proposed amendment. Again, we're going to keep working that amendment, but to take this information, take the discussion we've had tonight, the description that Lee gave you, if you can, spend your 4th of July with this document. Don't throw it in the campfire, you know, so, yes, that'll be overnight, and, so from here, the concept is to get the group together again on July 12th, and as Lee mentioned, he'll be in town for a couple days, and right now we're looking at the 12th as an opportunity for us to sit with him and begin to work through some of the issues we've talked about geographically. I'm sorry.
Is that evening meeting or is it day meeting?
I don't know. It sounds like it needs to be a morning meeting. It goes into the evening. It's an evening meeting. For those of you who are familiar with the village, you know that this is Old Home Week, so we will not be here. We're working on a site for that, but it will not be here. Obviously, it won't be at Town Hall either. So we'll figure out where that's going to be, and we'll publicize the location. But it does afford us an opportunity to work directly with him and begin to try and pin down the geographies for some of these areas. Some of them might be quite simple, and then we may have gotten it right, and we just kind of go ahead and acknowledge the prospective district that should be located there. Some of the others are going to be more interesting and probably filled with a little more discussion, as we've hit upon tonight. So, in the immediate future, that's the plan. I hope that everyone is able to make that meeting.
Basically the same exercise, except instead of picking one of 4 sites, we're going to pick one of 12. So if we could have the map and...
Yeah, that's exactly... Well, you've got the table, you've got the map. Do you want something bigger individually to work with?
No, I guess it's the same map, it's just blow it up on...
Well, no, I mean...
We have the map.
I mean, biggest we can probably do, unless we're gonna start plotting things out, is 11 by 17 versions of the map. If that's helpful, we can provide those.
No, I just need to find
I mean, I don't know, well,
100% ready to go.
would people prefer to have a larger map? That's fine, that's a good suggestion, we'll do that. All right.
Could you email that out as well?
Yes, we'll email it out, and then, we'll probably print them out and mail them to you as well with some other information. The table is adequate in size, or do you want 11 by 17 version of that as well? Does anybody have any preferences there? Yeah, okay. Well, we'll work with that a little bit. Yeah, and we'll have large versions there that we'll be able to throw on the table. You'll be working with larger versions of the map. Exactly.
I'll offer Harlem Road if you're interested.
I'm sorry, Brian, say that again. You got it.
I'll offer Harlem Road again.
Okay, that's good. That's a good suggestion as well.
We got air, I think we have air in the odd that's working.
Okay. We're looking at a couple of different options there, so that's a good suggestion, we'll keep that one in mind. Okay, so right now, we're scheduled to meet at 7, but I think we could probably move that back at least an hour, and if folks tell me that they're available earlier than that, early in the afternoon, he's here for 3 days, so whatever time you think you're collectively able to get together, we'll start. Okay. So not to conflict with that event, but is there, I guess I'll let you talk about the actual schedule there. Just so you know, so we'll meet on the 12th, and I think we're gonna call for a committee meeting or some form of meeting on the 26th of July, which we had previously talked about. I'm not sure what that form is gonna be just yet. Depends on how far we get on the 12th together. We may have to work on that again on the 26th. We'll make that determination at the meeting on the 12th. And then following that, we'll try and have a couple of public information meetings to describe what you've done in early August. And hopefully, between that and some of the comments that we receive from the community to the hearing we had a week or so ago, we'll have more information for the planning board to consider at their meeting in August. And I emphasize consider. Just for your information, there's a couple of other meeting dates that are outlined on your agenda. The 23rd of August and the 13th of September we've identified as meeting dates. The activities will be determined as to how we proceed with or progress with some of the work we have to do here. So that's an outline of the schedule.
Were you saying you wanted to start the meeting on the 12th?
Yeah, is there a preference? I have no objection to meeting prior to 7 p.m. Is anyone have a preference out there?
So just, again, to take advantage of Lee's visit here, he's arriving on the 11th, he'll be here the 12th, and he departs on the 13th. So not to be overly optimistic, but, we have the evenings of the 11th and 12th, and I'll just throw that out there as well.
I'd be concerned about having like a 4-hour marathon meeting. I'd be okay with 2 hours.
Would you like to?
Here because of the chase here. I mean, why don't we start at 6 o'clock?
Okay, 6 o'clock, 6 to 8 on both the...
Start earlier, whoever makes it, makes it. I mean, really.
Some people have problems here. I'd like to have everybody in the room at the same time when we start, but, coming in, 2 minutes later, an hour late to your schedule calls for that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to miss participation in the next.
So to be clear, we're going to meet both on the 12th and the 13th? Or the 11th and the 12th? Okay. 11th and 12th at 6 p.m. And your office will give us a reminder, Dan? Before we go to public comment, I just want to jump to item 2 and,
Find that, so we want to meet on the 11th and 12th, we want to start at 6 p.m.
6 p.m. And I believe we're going to try for the Harlem Road Community Center, is that?
I want the applicant to stick around.
Okay. So if we could jump to item 2, and are there any questions with respect to the meeting minutes of May 25th? And if not, I'd like a motion to accept those meeting notes. Gary? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. I'd like to now open this up to public comment.
My name is Tom Spring, and I'd like to...
Tom.
Thank you. I'd like to make a comment on the town of Amherst 21st century bicentennial comprehensive master plan for long-term zoning project management. As far as what the intention behind the NYSERDA grant was for establishing a statewide initiative. And this project is ongoing as far as what the mayor of the village started with the Congress of New Urbanism and the Picture Main Street, that this has to be included in the comprehensive plan as far as an amendment. And I want to thank Ramona for her comments on the green space. That's an important component as far as the one region forward. As far as the CFA grant application, that this is going to be it's going to be ongoing. As far as mutual multi-municipal benefit project having to do with, and it was in today's paper, as far as the relocation, how the governor is involved on Grand Island as far as the relocation of the toll barrier because of the air quality. And that's what we have here outside this front door where the Amherst Town Hall is, that you have the air quality as far as Main Street is a health hazard. As far as the quality of life, it's just gotten worse, and it has to be taken on. And that was the purpose for the NYSERDA grant, having to do with reducing the emissions and generating economic development, that they're compatible. And that for that reason, as far as the Worley Drive suburban corridor, as far as the commercial mixed-use corridor, going from Transit Road to Harlem Road, that is important because it's connected to the New York State Interstate Thruway. And as far as the relocation of those two tolls, it has to go through the planning process. As far as the town board and the village board, it's going to be. But and I was glad to see that Eric had sent the minutes as far as the lead agency status for the state environmental quality review to clearance, because this, as far as the public-private sector partnership, as far as the value proposition, okay, for mitigating the traffic on Main Street.
Mr. Frank?
Yes?
Thank you. Can we get to our other...
Okay, all in favor for the recommendation for the Worley Drive corridor?
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Frank.
Good. I'm looking forward to putting that in the application.
Sir?
Calls for it, right?
Good evening, board members. My name is Don Smith. First of all, when I first heard about this project, I was very suspicious of it, and I'm still suspicious of the project. But don't get me wrong, I know there's a lot of work, and everybody's committed to doing a lot of work to this project, and I'm not downgrading or downgrading anybody's ability. Anybody willing to work this hard, I'm willing to give them a chance. And what Mr. Giazza said, I knew exactly what he meant, every single word. And I'm telling you right now, at this point in time, the problem really here is this project is still in a vacuum, still in a bubble, as far as the residents of the town are concerned. There hasn't been enough to involve the town residents. I don't know how you're going to do that. I just know that the skill levels and talents of the people driving this don't have that ability. They're incapable of doing that properly. They don't have the background talent or skills in order to involve the town, or in fact the attitude. That's the problem. I appreciate hard work when I see it. I know this is not an easy thing to do, but I know the impact on the residents is going to be extremely significant, and I know they do not know what that's going to be. The people don't. So if there's anybody who's going to have to be an advocate for the residents, unfortunately, it's got to be you people, because there ain't anybody else out there doing it. What I don't particularly care for at this point in time is when I come up and make my comments, they're seen as negative. And I think at this point in time, I've been pretty much discounted in all my opinions on what's happening around here. I feel bad about that, but I think that's natural to what happens around people when they get protective of what they're doing. First thing you can't do is be protective. You got to be open, and that means you got to listen. That means there's a lot of things that may be changing, things that you may want that you're not going to get. So it's got to be a balance, and everybody keeps using that word balance. And frankly, you got to fight for that every day, and that's what I'm trying to do. I know exactly. I worked a long time. I'm retired. I worked in 37 different states and 2 foreign countries. I've been around the bend a lot of times. I could see in Mr. Chiazza's eyes exactly what he meant every time he said what he said. I know what's going on, and frankly, I'm hoping that this group here actually says what's the effect on the residents, and more than just what's the height, more on just and I can see it in what Mr. Ulatowski's doing from time to time. I can see it in some of the people's. I know there's a predisposition here for development, redevelopment, and I know that's what's going on. I know what the factors and the forces going on behind it, why, market, all that sort of thing. So I'm hoping that you people here, take it as one of your primary responsibilities to be an advocate for the residents and everybody else. Thank you very much for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Actually, just I thought of my third comment. With having the meetings in July and everything, the town board has meetings, 3 o'clock meetings on July 31st and August 14th. I was wondering if the town board could be updated at the August 14th meeting with what's been happening, if that's possible.
Took you a while there, Carl.
I'll second.
Just do it.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thanks.